Right, that brings us to Britnerf events. I've got to take my hat off to all the game organisers who've sprung up in the last 5-6 years, and we've had a great input of people willing to give their time to organise events. Now, those events are run and regulated to kind of a set of rules. Most of them have insurance and liability insurance, and those that don't run liability insurance often are on public land. So there's a kind of different deal with events. Now, what we've done is the other piece of legislation that impacts how we can run, first of all, is the levels of kinetic energy, or energy in this case, imparted by the projectile, which has been recently legislated on to tighten up the laws around airsoft. So what that says is that if you have a any projectile firing weapon with a muzzle energy of 1 joule or more, it is classed as a barreled air weapon. So if you go over 1 joule, it's classed as a barreled air weapon, and you can't have it in a public place. You can't possess it. Doesn't matter what it looks like. You cannot possess a barreled air weapon of 1 joule muzzle output or more in a public place. So if you're playing in a park, we've worked out the FPS, and that's practically around 130 feet per second. That keeps you below 1 joule, keeps you legal, and it doesn't matter what propulsion system you have. The law doesn't specifically cover flywheels because it's intended to be catch-all for airsoft, which doesn't use them. However, we would not like as a community to see a test case on that, because we've worked hard to make Nerf in the UK bigger and to make it more open and to make it something that people want to take part in and that we can put on in lots of different places. So with that in mind, if you're organising a game in a park, try to keep it below 130, because if you had a few players that maybe were a bit unruly or you were a little bit disorganised, maybe a passerby had a near miss, then those things they would potentially investigate, and if you are carrying anything that classes a barrel air weapon, they'll just take it off you and they'll destroy it. So bear that in mind, no barrel air weapons in any public place. So that is why most park games or public space games in the UK have a 130 cap. That then moves us into our kind of semi-closed field games. So we have some games that are on private land, some of them are held at chapels and other places, and those are kind of fenced from the public, so you can't walk in as a member of the public. You can, but it's not technically a public building because it's not open to the general public every day. Like a library would be a public building, a fenced church area is not a public building. So those areas you are allowed to have, usually, and the game organisers will say what you are not allowed to have there, and because it's a closed space, you're not going to be running around a park and everybody who's there is there for a Nerf game, and the local community usually stand by and laugh at us through the fence, but they're not going to be alarmed because they can see that it's organised and it's within a church. So it's extremely unlikely that there'd be 30 armed people in a church in the UK. So those things, they'll usually have a very clear description of what is and isn't allowed on their game brief, and do check with game organisers. So there's a place where you can run pretty much anything. I've appeared at those games in fancy dress, I've appeared at those games in full Osprey body armour, I've appeared at those games with highly realistic stuff, I've appeared at those games with very unrealistic stuff. So pretty much you can do what you like at those games as long as the game organisers are cool with it, so check with those. And those are all insured, and those generally have a 130 cap because the insurance required below 130 is much easier to get. And most buildings' public liability insurance can be adapted to cover it, provided we tell them what we're doing. So that's the low tier stuff and the reasoning behind that. Now then you move on to closed field, high FPS. You cannot have any high FPS in public places in the UK. That's because of the 1 joule law. So anything in the UK in a public space must be below 130. So to get around this, ultra stock games in the UK are now on closed sites. They may be in a variety of different closed sites. We've had ones at Milton Keynes and their soft site there. We've had ones at, we've got Impact Northwest, which is up near Wigan, and we've got FFS, which is near Warminster. Now, all of those closed field sites, anything goes. Again, up to the game organisers' rules as to what they'll put their cap at. Most of those are 300 feet per second because the sites have airsoft or they have paintball insurance. If they've got paintball insurance, we're fine, because we're going to be under the paintball kinetic limit, and that means we can run pretty much whatever we like. Now all those sites, there's no limits on firearms outline, there's no limits on anything else that you want to wear. So there are games for those of you who like the full-on milsim stuff. Players may or may not have different attitudes to that, because Nerf is an inclusive sport. It's designed to take in as many people as possible. We want to make it just as accessible to somebody who wants to wear a Pikachu costume and run round with something brightly coloured, to somebody who wants to wear full tactical gear and body armour and wants to hide in a bush. I kind of fall a little bit into the latter category for Ultra Stock because there's very few places where I can really go nuts in the woods and stalk my fellow nerfers. So I have a lot of fun at those Ultra Stock events. I've got to say thank you very much to the guys from FFS because their game has been one of the best things I've done in the last 2 years by far in Nerf, and it's kind of my dream game. So we've got loads of different game types you can get stuck into in the UK, and that's one of the cool things about our community. So we've got like high power games on closed fields, we've got 100 FPS games which are really family friendly and are designed to be used in lots of spaces like shopping malls, like smaller venues, five-a-side football pitches, and stadiums, that kind of stuff, and anybody can get into that, which is great because you're not going to be talking about breaking rule 1. At lots of those events. Then we've got chapel events, we've got high power events, we've got closed high power events, we've got pretty much anything you can imagine. And that is the point about Nerf versus other tagging sports, is we're not one thing, we're many things. And Nerf is adaptable, and it's fun, and it's easy to tweak into however you want. If a group of you want to play stuff that's not currently catered for, then you go ahead and start it. Quick Flag, up in Bridgewater, started like that. A group of people thought, we want to play SG Quick Flag. Nobody does it, let's do it. And I went and played that game, that was a lot of fun, and that's a good example of something that wasn't existing in the UK that somebody started. So if you've got an issue with how a game runs, start your own. You'll always get help from the community. Go and have a good look, make sure that your game is safe, and let's get more variety. Let's not exclude people. If you're at an event where the rules clearly say outline is okay of any kind, firearms outline is okay, don't bag on a guy for having a black blaster, that breaks rule 1. So remember rule 1 first, then what the game organisers say, then have fun. Those are the 3 things you need to be successful and have a good time at games.